Guten Tag, WAP. This is Mr. Liniger. Let's make history today as we go over Unit 1, Day 5. Today we're going to talk about Western Europe during the post-classical period from around 1200 to 1450. But let's get started with our daily punishment. I don't trust stairs because they're always up to something. Stairs. All right, here are your key terms for today. Feudalism, manorialism, monasticism, serfdom, scholasticism, St. Thomas Aquinas, the Holy Roman Empire, the Investiture Controversy, the Hanseatic League, urbanization, the three failed system, the three estates, guilds, chivalry, Blessed Hildegard von Bingen, and Marian devotion. We're going to talk about the religious changes in Western Europe after 1200, political and economic changes in Western Europe after 1200, the rise of regional states, economic developments during this time period, trade in Western Europe, social structure, the rise of guilds, church and learning, and popular religion. That's a lot. All right, let's get started. So the governmental system for most of the Middle Ages until the very end was the feudal system. Feudalism is a term you should know. Feudalism is a hierarchy. It's a decentralized form of government. The king does not have a lot of power. There's the king. Below the king are the nobles. Below the nobles are the knights, and below the knights are the serfs. The king gives the nobles land, and in return, the nobles fight for the king. The nobles give land to the knights, and the knights fight for the nobles. And the knights offer protection to the peasants, and in return, the peasants give up their freedom and become serfs. It's a political system based on mutual reciprocity. It happened and was created really after the Roman Empire fell. And feudalism is going to be a pretty big thing. Vassals are people that serve somebody else. So the vassals for the king are the nobles. The vassals for the nobles are knights. Serfdom is going to develop in Western Europe during this time. You're going to have some differences between peasants and serfs. Peasants were free. They owned their land. Serfs were not free. They could not own their land. Serfs could also be denied things like marriage. It is not slavery, though. The economic system in Western Europe is called manorialism. Manorialism is a form of agricultural organization. It's really what it means. It's a self-sufficient community. After the Roman Empire fell, there was very little trade. So they created these little isolated economic manors, like large houses where they had like a castle, three-field system, and it was self-sufficient. They made anything themselves. It was controlled by the Lord, really like just agricultural based. Here's a picture of it, the manorial system. You have the three-field system, pasture, a water mill, church. Yep. The Catholic Church will increase power during this time. The popes will start to claim that spiritual power is superior to temporal power or governmental power. Italy was divided into city-states. They constantly quarreled with each other. The German emperors, like the Holy Roman emperors, were at war with nobles. The French kings were not very weak. So during this time, bishops, which are like, they're kind of like a higher version of priests. They're in charge of multiple churches. They're going to start to acquire more land. They'll become part of the feudal system. And the Catholic Church will start to get more involved in politics, the Pope will. The popes will have some powers during this time to enforce their will. They can excommunicate people that oppose them, kick them out of the church. They could do an interdict where the people, like a group of people or a person, cannot get Holy Communion. They could use canon law to justify their teachings. Economically, they receive tithes. They're free from taxation, and they own great economic wealth. Some popes will become heads of reform movements. They'll abolish simony, where you give appointments to like your relatives. They'll insist on celibacy of priests. Priests cannot get married. They can't have sex. They'll try to reform monasteries. Western Europe will also go through monasticism. They'll establish College of Cardinals to elect the popes. Kings will not elect the popes. Mobs will not elect the popes. Popes during this time will launch crusades against Muslims, heretic Christians, some Italian city-states. And reformers will set up monasteries during this period. The most famous one is St. Benedict. Monasteries will become the dominant feature in social and cultural life in Western Europe. Monasteries, unlike in the Byzantine Empire, will be located in cities. A lot of monasteries will become the first universities, and they'll be very tied to the urban life. And they will provide services for the poor. One of the things for the church and learning is during this time, we're going to have something called scholasticism. The Western Europeans will rediscover Greek philosophy, specifically Aristotle and Plato. A lot of Christian priests will be very memorized by Aristotle. They liked his rationality, and they're going to try to combine the rationality of Aristotle and combine it with Christian doctrine. And that's what scholasticism is. The most famous person that did that was St. Thomas Aquinas. The Western Europeans are going to rediscover Greek writing from the Byzantines and the Muslims because after the Roman Empire fell, a lot of the Greek writings were destroyed. But if you remember from earlier, the Muslims also discovered Greek writing and they translated it into Arabic. So the Western Europeans are going to get Greek texts from from their interactions with the Muslims and the Byzantines. Religions of the masses. Sacraments and devotionals to the sacraments will become very popular. People will be very superstitious. You'll have witch trials. There'll be some blending of Christianity and paganism. There will be reform movements that will try to get rid of some of the heresies during this time. The Dominicans and Franciscans will be two Christian organizations that will be formed to convert people, and the Dominicans especially will be to persecute heresies. Some of the people they will go after during this time were John Huss and John Wycliffe. Huss and Wycliffe. Both of these people were kind of like proto-members of the Protestant Reformation. They happened a couple hundred years before the Protestant Reformation, but they will influence the beliefs of the Protestant Reformation, so they'll be very important. Huss believed in the idea of like kind of sola scriptura. The Bible should be translated to the local language. Wycliffe had some similar things in his critique of the Catholic Church. Let's talk about politics in Western Europe. Eventually, we're going to start to see regional states where like local nations will become more powerful and feudalism will kind of lose power. The Holy Roman Empire was made up of smaller states in Western Europe, specifically mostly in Germany and Italy. It was decentralized. They would elect the Pope themselves. They would elect the Emperor themselves. They had a love-hate relationship with the Catholic Church. The Holy Roman Emperor was considered to be like the major political leader of the Catholic Church, but like him and the Pope often fought for power. One of the biggest examples of this is the Investiture Controversy. In the Investiture Controversy, the Holy Roman Emperor was appointing bishops. The Pope said he's the only one that could appoint bishops. The Pope excommunicated the Emperor. The Emperor had to wait in the rain for 3 days because the Pope told his subjects not to even listen to him anymore. The Emperor had to wait in the rain for 3 days before the Pope would forgive him. This is like a drawing of it. Eventually, the Emperor got his revenge and invaded Italy and overthrew the Pope. But there will be a lot of conflicts like that between the Pope and the emperors. And a lot of it is about power. We'll start to see regional states develop during this time. We see France, the family dynasty that's going to rule France are the Capetians. France will not be very centralized. England will become a nation under the Normans. William the Bastard or William the Conqueror will invade England, and he will, in 1066, he'll invade England, and he will create his dynasty on England, the Plantagenets, for the next couple hundred years. Italy was heavily influenced by the church. They were not united in one country. It was made up of city-states like Venice, Genoa, Florence, Milan. Iberia was mostly Muslim during this time, but the Christians are going to slowly start to push the Muslims out in the Christian Reconquista. Let's talk a little bit more about economics. At the very end of this time period, by the 1400s, Europe turns away from manorialism and starts to become more urbanized. You start to see more trade. Cities become more urbanized. A lot of times serfs would flee to the cities because if they stayed in the city for 1 year and 1 day, they would get their freedom. You're going to see increased textile production in northern Italy, Flanders, and England. They produce wool. You'll see some very wealthy trading city-states in Italy, like Florence and Venice. There'll be an economic league in Germany called the Hanseatic League. It was made up of German trading city-states. They controlled trade in Northern Europe and the Baltic Sea. They formed a decentralized alliance where they could kind of dictate politics through their economic powerhouse-ness. There will be some economic changes during this time. We have improved farming techniques. We have crop rotation methods, which is the 3-field system, new use of fertilizer, use of water mills, horseshoe, horse collar. After 1000, there'll be more meat, dairy production, fish and vegetables, and legumes, which will make people's diet healthier and will increase the population. The population will go from 29 to 79 million, from 800 to 1300. You're going to start to see trade and urban centers develop by the 10th century. Let's talk about the social structure in Western Europe. As a generalization, the social structure is called the 3 estates. The highest estate is the clergy, the priest, those who pray. The second estate is those who fight. That's the nobles, the knights. And then the third estate is those who work, the peasants and the serfs. There starts to become kind of an unofficial estate by the very end of this time period. Those who live in towns, the burghers, those are the ones that are living in the towns. They might be artisans, merchants. They kind of become an unofficial estate. We have guilds developing during this times. Guilds are like a group of people that all have the same jobs. They're all blacksmith. They all get together. They decide together how much they all will charge for goods. That way there's no competition, so they all make money. They also decide if a person can actually join their thing and become a blacksmith. So like if I want to become a blacksmith in Lisbon, I might have to serve as an apprentice for 10 years for a master blacksmith before the guild gives me permission. If I don't have permission from the guild, I cannot do that job. The ethical system in Western Europe during this time, especially by the knights and the nobles, was called chivalry. Chivalry is like kind of like an idea of honor and stuff. If I'm fighting somebody and maybe he drops his sword, I wait for him to pick it up. At the very end of this unit, you will start to see legislative branches being formed, although the kings are still becoming more powerful. Estates General in England, they have the parliament, assemblies. Eventually, most rulers will grant nobles and clergy the right to assemble to debate. Let's talk lastly about some popular religion and gender. The ideal woman during the Middle Ages in Western Europe was the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary will become more popular during this time. This is when we get the rosary created. This is really when she takes off. As for women, women had a public role and a private role. Women in Western Europe had a very small public role. It was a man's world. They could not own... in some areas, they could own property, but for the most part, women could not own property. They had very little legal rights. The private role for the women really differed. If you're an aristocratic woman, your whole job is for a marriage alliance. Your dad's going to marry you with some other noble to try to get more land. You're just a pawn on a chessboard. Poor women, it was a man's world, but for poor women, they also had to do jobs for the family. They worked. Sometimes they also had to work in the fields. For church women could be abbesses and nuns. They couldn't become priests. Some of them ran monasteries that were educated, and some of them are going to have great influence. There will be some famous women during this day who kind of defied the expectation that women had no power. Eleanor of Aquitine was the Duchess of Normandy. She will marry the King of France, and then she'll marry the King of England afterwards. She'll support troubadours, promote good manners, refinement, arts, and romantic love. She'll be considered one of the most beautiful women during this time, and she was very powerful. The other one was a nun, Blessed Hildegard Von Bingen, who became a Catholic saint. She was a mystic, intellectual. She was considered so holy that she was an advisor to bishops and popes. So there were some limited examples of women having a large role during this time period. All right, guys, that's all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces. Deuces, deuces.